Hi, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So this is the new digs for the next month. So this is being recorded on 3/8. So we are still in our first procedure with Noah on the Halo, but we are not to the actual procedure, which would be already in the past by the time you get this one. So hopefully things went well. I guess we'll know on some updated videos. On that kind of stuff. So I still don't have an intro, so sorry I haven't posted that on the YouTube thing yet. Apparently one is being worked out, but I don't have it as of this video. So we are going to talk about elections. This is the chapter where we are going to go over how elections work, and we're going to look at political parties. So the first thing we need to start with is let's start with our side of it first, and then we'll say, okay, how do we run for office and how do elections work? So the voting process and the election process all starts with people being registered or able to vote. Now, there are some discrepancies in different procedures for how people register to vote in different countries, but in our process, it's pretty straightforward. If you're 18 years old, then you can register to vote, unless you're a felon. Hopefully there are no 18-year-old felons. But you can register to vote. It's very easy. You can register online. You can go to the motor vehicle place, DMV, or the Department of Motor, something like that. All right, so if we register to vote, that's where you're going to you're going to have to fill out the form, and you're going to have to say your address, and then it's your first opportunity to register for a political party. Now, do you need to register for a political party? It all depends on how involved you want to be in the process. You don't have to register for a political party. You don't have to stay registered for the same political party your whole life. Anytime you want to change your political party, you just fill out an update on when you register to vote, and you can change it from Democrat, Republican, Green Party. There are many parties out there, Libertarian Party, but there is something that comes into play depending on which party you pick when we get to it in this lecture, okay? But you can change it at whenever you want. Additionally, when you move, you need to change your voter registration to your new address. And the reason why is you get assigned to a polling place, and that polling place is necessary for you to go if you're going to go in person to vote. So you want to make sure it's registered accurately. Additionally, if you live from where you live depends on who you can vote for different offices. So we have to keep our voter registration up to date. You can change it at any time. You can change your party at any time. So it's not locked in stone. Now, before we get moving, we know there's Democrats, we know there's Republicans. Maybe some of you knew there was Green Party or Libertarians. But independent, we throw that term around a lot. But what does it really mean? Well, turns out there's actually an independent party. So if you want to register as an independent, but not the independent party, you do not register for independent. What you register is NPP. No party preference. That means that you're not affiliating yourself with any party, but you are allowed to vote in all the general elections, but not necessarily in one of the 5 ways to run for office, which is what we're going to get to next. It might limit you. You can run for office, but you might not get to vote at a certain stage for people who are running for office. Okay, so what are our 5 ways to run for office? There's really only 4, but you know how I work. Sometimes I add things, sometimes I subtract things, because one of them only has to do if you're running for president. But the other ones do work for you, and so let's start with the first one. So our first one on ways to run for office is really self-explanatory because it is the self-announcement. I know, complicated. You actually have to stand up in some manner, whether it's virtually or in person, and you have to say, I'm so-and-so, well, you should insert your name, and I'm running for this office. You see it all the time you don't see it because unless it's on TikTok, it's not going to be there. But theoretically speaking, at some point, everyone who's ever run for a political office, whether it's mayor, whether it's city council, whether it's board of supervisors, whether it's the president or Senate or House of Representatives, at some point in some manner, they have done a self-announcement to say, I am Taylor Salisbury and I'm running for vice president, although we don't run for vice president. So that's a bad example. And I'm running for governor. Okay. But you have to self-announce. If you don't, I guess technically you could still run, but it's just better if we self-announce, because you have to do this next step too, which is you have to say you're going to run, and then you have to fill out what is called a petition. A petition is a legal form that election departments require to put your name on the ballot. Now, there is a loophole, which is the write-in candidate, but to my knowledge, very few, if any, ever write-in candidates have ever actually won, because you actually have to spell their name right. I would make an awful write-in candidate. Catalia would also make an awful write-in candidate. However, Cody Crowell maybe would make an okay write-in candidate. James on the fence, but we couldn't use nicknames either. So Lily, not going to work. Let's see, anyone else I want to... Oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. Nah, we'll just move on from there. So we have to have a petition in order to run for an office as well. We say we're going to run, and then we have a petition that we have to go around and get registered voters. Now, if you're running for mayor, you need registered voters in the city. So if you go to Northern Avenue and get a bunch of signatures, it's not going to help you. If you're running for a county board of supervisor, you have to get signatures from your particular district. Okay, and those signatures have to be registered voters. Now, it's not like all the people have to vote for you that sign your petition, but it just means that there's a certain minimum requirement you have to get in order to get placed on the ballot. And it's usually a percentage of the number of people who voted for that office in the last election. So as you can imagine, as the prestige of the office goes up, so too do the number of signatures necessary for a petition in order to be placed on the ballot. President, of course, would need multiple signatures in multiple states in order to get it placed on individual ballots. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 still exists a little bit, but it doesn't, it's not really used as much. And that is, of course, a caucus. The most famous would be the ones way back in Andrew Jackson's day when he said it was King Caucus. But caucusing is where party members gather together to choose a nominee. Now, in some places that still happens. You'll probably see it maybe in New England a little bit, and maybe in the Midwest. But there's a problem with it. Party members are picking the nominees. So historically, and as we've moved to the modern era, it has definitely been seen as less democratic. So people tend to move away from caucusing, although there are some famous ones when we run for president. There's the Iowa caucuses, which is the most famous, where there's not really an election. Party members meet. If you're a member of a political party, you go to a meeting. I say party members. So once you register, you are a member of a political party. And so therefore you would get to go, if you were in Iowa, you would go to this caucus in the different regions and the different meetings, and that's where you would say, this is who I want to be our nominee. Okay. Now, once again, I said that is running a little bit to not being as democratic. So in many states, and in most states, it has been replaced by our 4th way, which is a primary, which we will talk about in a second, but I want to mention the 5th one. The 5th one is way to run for office is, of course, the nominating, of course, like you would know, right? Nominating convention. This is the one I was talking about with the president, okay? A nominating convention is technically where the president gets picked to run for an office. You think it's the primaries, but it's not. Sort of like the Electoral College is in place, and that is really what picks the president. Technically speaking, the nominating convention is what technically picks the presidential candidate. What happens is the primaries instruct the states which delegates get to go to the convention, because there's always a convention and for president. And so you're picking who gets to go to that. It would be like JRGC, okay? So if the presidential election was like JRGC, Renaissance, well, in a way, would pick in our city, in the Kingman Academy Renaissance, would pick delegates to go to JRGC. And at JRGC, they would pick who the nominee is for Supreme Chancellor. Okay. And then people would get to vote, although in a Supreme Chancellor Senate, we wouldn't necessarily have voting, of who that was going to be. And that looks very similar to our president, where we have these primaries in all the states. You might have heard terms like Super Tuesday or things of that nature. And people dropping in and carrying on in these races. And what that is doing in every state is saying, okay, these are the delegates that are going to go to the nominating convention. And at the nominating convention, they're going to do a vote. And that person is going to be the nominee for president. Okay. Yeah. But that's only for president. Most of you are always going to, or ever going to experience the primary system. The primary system, if we want to look at it in a particular way, I guess it's not like the Hunger Games because, is it? No, it's not. All right. So it is probably more like a reality television show. The Bachelor, America's Got Talent, The Voice, something of that nature, where we're going to have a field of contestants. And it's our job, the voters, to vote on a particular set of contestants or a particular contestant to get into the final show. And then hopefully that person will win. So primaries are like the semifinals of an election where particular groups of people get to vote for people, and then you narrow the field down to one candidate. And then there's another election, which is the finals, and that's where people get to pick who the actual person is. So you can change your mind. You can vote a particular way in one primary, and then in the general election, you could change your mind. Primaries are going to be more locked, though, depending upon what type. And that leads us to our next section, which is types of primaries. So let's go down there and talks about that. Okay, so talks about that. Yeah, whatever, right? All right, types of primaries. So there are, I'm saying so a lot. Apologies, but I will probably continue saying so again. So there are three types of primaries. They are really easy to understand once you understand the idea of a door. Okay, if you understand the idea of a door, if you look around, you will see that there are two of them. Actually, there's more than two because it depends on how you consider the cabinets, right? Or if they're cabinet doors, then there's more than two. There's lots of doors. They open, they close, and sometimes people are stupid and they leave them partially open. Not that the primary is going to be stupid. However, we should open doors or shut doors, but not leave them partially opened, especially when it comes to cabinets. So let's go with the type of primaries. Okay, number one, the open primary. The open primary is a primary system where anyone of any political party can participate in a primary. Usually what happens in an open primary is that Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Green Party and Independents and no party preferences, they go to the polling place and they can say, okay, I want X ballot, meaning a Republican roster of candidates, a Democrat roster of candidates, or if there's more than those candidates running, you can pick those. You go into the polling place, into the voting booth, which is very fancy. Not really, but let's pretend it is, okay? You will have an option in life to vote from home. You can vote via mail, or you can go to the polling place on the day of voting and get the cool snazzy sticker that says I voted. I would encourage you to do both, whichever the most convenient is for you. Okay, but you go to the polling place, you get a ballot, you go into the voting booth, and you vote for a slate of candidates. So in an open primary system, you theoretically could be a Democrat who then chooses a Republican primary ballot and then votes for a candidate you feel it would be the best candidate of the Republicans, even though you are a Democrat, and vice versa. Okay, an open primary allows anyone to vote in a primary election. Doesn't matter on your voting practice. Okay. Now, I bet you, just like I said with a door, what's the other state of a door that's not Schrodinger's cat? A closed door. Okay. Well, I know love is an open door, but in this particular case, there is no love when it comes to a closed door. Okay, a closed door in a closed door primary means that only party members can vote for a particular primary. Republicans have to vote in a Republican primary. Democrats have to vote in a Democratic primary. Green Party people can only vote if there's a Green Party primary. Independents can only vote in the Independent Party primary. And no party preference can vote in None of them. So when I told you about registering to vote and I said you could choose, this is where that comes into play. If your state is a closed primary, and a lot of times these states flip-flop all the time between open, closed, semi-open. It all depends on how much they really want to encourage other people to get involved in the political process. In a closed primary, if you choose no party preference, then you will not be able to vote in the primary, which means you get no say in who the eventual candidates are going to be in the election. It doesn't mean you can't vote in the election, which is the finals where everybody's, the main candidate is listed. It just means you don't get to shape who the candidate might be initially. Okay, in presidential primary, I think, like when Trump was running, there was a whole bunch of people. I'm not going to bog you down with names, but those were all in the primary system, and as primaries went, they started dropping out. Okay, you tend to not have primary challengers if you're the incumbent, unless you prove to be unpopular. So it wasn't uncommon for Biden to not have a challenger. What is uncommon is for Biden to drop and then somebody who wasn't in the primary system to become the nominee, which was Harris. But it's not unheard of that Biden wouldn't have had a challenger in the primary, although one might have been there. It was never going to be serious. Just as Trump would never really had a Republican primary candidate going against them. Because if the party doesn't have faith in you, how can you expect the undecideds to have faith in you? Okay, so we had a open primary, we have a closed primary, and then we have love is a semi-open door. And that is, of course, the semi-open primary. Not quite open, not quite closed. Okay? Semi-open primary. A lot of times Arizona has this. Okay? So if open is anyone and closed is only party members, what do you think semi-open is? Well, you're right. It is where no party preference people get to choose. You want those people to support you in an election. So a lot of states allow no party preference, people who are registered not as a political party, to choose which ballot they want to vote for on in a primary election in order to encourage them to get involved in the political process and to support one of their candidates early. Okay, so that's what that kind of primary is. A semi-open primary means that only the no party preference people can vote. Now, we have ways to run for office. We know how to register to vote. We know the kinds of primaries that are out there. Now, who runs elections? Who? Maybe. We'll see. All right. So keep saying it. Whatever. Now there is another type of primary out there. It's called a runoff primary, but very few states have that because it just takes too much time. A runoff primary, what happens is you have a primary, and then certain states have a minimum percentage where you have to get in order to be the nominee. Now, if you don't get that percentage, then what happens is they eliminate the bottom section and keep the top two, and then they have another primary. Now, I know some one of you is saying, is this going to be on the test? Probably not, but you will in the end remember it, just like lots of things that aren't on tests that you remember, and you don't remember some of the things that we are on the test, right? Okay, so who runs elections? Now, elections are not run by the national government. Any election. Okay, all elections are run by state governments, and state governments have the counties run the elections. So, once again, saying so, counties run the election. The national government doesn't run it. States get to run them. So therefore, you could have many states using different types of equipment. And then states say, counties, you're in charge of it. So counties are the ones that actually run the elections. And every county, although a lot of them are developing similar voting machines, we used to have a lot more variety in how people actually voted on what kind of machine. But counties are the ones that run the election. And then they turn in their results based on the precincts in their counties to the state, who then publishes and certifies the elections. Okay, or it just stays countywide if it's a county office or city office. It's still run by the county. Okay, and therefore Counties are the ones that run the election. Now, Congress does have a role. For federal elections, they can set the time and the place. Now, I'm not saying like 6 o'clock in the morning. Okay. I'm just saying that they get to set the time and the place for federal elections. And it is consistent. Okay. Here it is. I'm not going to write it down because it's fun to try to visualize in your brain. Okay. Federal elections are run on the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November, every 2 years. Now, the president doesn't run every 2 years, but federal elections are held every 2 years. And it is, once again, the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Now, I know someone in here, I'm looking at you. Wait, hold on, right there. I'm looking at you. You are probably saying, well, isn't that just the first Tuesday in November? No. It can only occur if there's at least a Monday in November before an election day. So if November 1st is a Wednesday, it'll be the following Tuesday. If November 1st is a Tuesday, it'll be the following Tuesday. The only time it would be the first Tuesday in November is if there's a Monday. So November 2nd is the only kind. It is the earliest it could be. It could never be November 1st. Okay, here's a hack. Here's an election hack. Okay, presidential elections have tended to fall now in the modern era on Olympics. Okay, if there's a Summer Olympics, you can guarantee that there is going to be a presidential election. Just as when there was the Olympics in Paris, there was a presidential election in November. The next time there is the Summer Olympics as well, which is 2028, there will be a presidential election. I believe the Olympics is in Los Angeles in 2028. So every time there's a Summer Olympics, you are going to have a presidential election. Okay. So we know how to run for office. We know what type of primaries are. Now, what kind of elections are there? Elections. There are two types of elections that you're going to run across in your life. The first type is a general election. Now that is as the name implies, it is a election that is where you're going to pick the most candidates. This is the typical election that all of us know about. You go and get your sticker. It occurs on a regular basis. You're going to vote for particular things such as local, county, or state offices. You're going to choose to retain judges. You are going to vote for, in Arizona, you're going to vote for elements of what we call direct democracy. So we'll come back up there in a second. Okay. So when you vote in a general election, Arizona allows citizens to have direct input into their government. And it is done through a series of things that we call direct democracy. Driving around town during election season, you might come across signs that have numbers on them. Well, those numbers aren't random. They are particular to the type of thing it is in Arizona. But those numbered signs that says vote on 101, vote on 203, vote on 313, all of those things are elements of direct democracy, and they are the following things. Okay? Let me go down a little bit here. Okay. 100s. When you see a 100, like 101, 102, 105, 115, whatever, you are voting on a state constitutional amendment. Oh, that's not spelled right. There we go. A state constitutional amendment. State constitutions are much easier to change than the U.S. Constitution. In fact, we change them all the time. In every election, almost always, one of the 100 things will pass, which will change the Constitution of Arizona. It's also why you don't have to memorize any of it. And we don't necessarily revere it as much as we do the U.S. Constitution, because it does change. And the more you change something, the less likely you are to appreciate it. Hashtag Edmund Burke, right? So, 100s, therefore, are state constitutional amendments. If you see that, we're changing the Arizona Constitution. The second type you're going to come across are 200s. 200s, like vote yes on 202, vote yes on 213, any of that, I think I say 13s a lot too, are what are called initiatives. An initiative is where the citizens want a law. So they are initiating a law. And the only way they can do that is to put it on the ballot and get people to vote on it. So the 200s are initiatives where you, anyone in here that's of legal age for voting, can go through the process of trying to get a law on the books of Arizona by going through this election process, which usually means getting signatures for a petition for registered voters in particular areas until you get enough, and then it can get placed on the ballot. Now, the third one are 300s. Now, in school, you might have heard like, oh, that's 301 money. Well, what that meant is that way back before you were born, or around, no, you were definitely before you were born, there was a proposition on the ballot that was called Prop 301. And what that was to increase funding for teachers and increase funding in education for what is called performance pay. Now, it was not created by people who wanted it. What it was is it was referred from the legislature to the people to choose if they wanted to have this happen or not. Sometimes laws that are on the fence are given to the people to decide whether or not it should be passed or not. So we call the 300s referendums, where the legislature is referring a topic to the people. So 100 state constitutional amendments, 200 initiatives, 300 referendums. Yes, that's probably going to be on the test, right? These are found in the general election, as well as what are called judge retention and then the offices that you normally vote for. Now, there are other elections that happen. They don't always happen regularly, and these are called special elections. Wow, that is a really difficult thing to remember, right? General tend to happens all the time. Special, unique, right? Special elections can take place in off-cycle times. It could be on a random day in May. It could be in September. It all depends on when they schedule a special election. Now, special elections are usually done for a couple of reasons. To fill a vacancy, we might have a special election. To do a recall, which is another element of our direct democracy. We tend to focus on ways to make laws, but also citizens can remove someone from office in Arizona through what is called a recall. Like, let's say they did something wrong, but they're not getting kicked out or impeached. The citizens themselves can try to remove them from office. So you might have a recall election, and then you might have another special election to fill that vacancy. Additionally, in a special election is where you might have a bond issue, which is used a lot of times to raise money that cities use to raise money for particular projects, whether it could be a rec center, whether it could be a performing arts center, or it could be for schools to build new schools in the area. The academy is not eligible for bonds, but that's how, like Desert Willow, White Cliffs, Lee Williams, all the schools in Kingman essentially at one time or another got built through a bond issue. It's also how, if you're in WAVE classes, how WAVE came about was through a bond issue or a special election where they issued not necessarily a bond, it was through a special election which created the WAVE district and then gives them the ability to do things. Now, if they want additional funds, they also qualify for like a bond election where you're picking or you're choosing on whether or not they can issue bonds to raise money for a particular project. Now, bonds is another thing that would be taught in an economics class, and we will touch on it probably a little bit later when we get there, okay? Now, you go to a general election. You say, I'm this person, I'm registered to vote, here's my identification, I want that snazzy sticker, but I have to do something first. Well, there are two types of ballots that you can get if you're running for an election, if you're going to vote in an election. One is more common than the other because it just is. Okay, the one that is the most common, actually, let's do the one that's not common. We'll do that one first, and that is a party column ballot. Just like the caucus is not necessarily the most democratic, the party column ballot can be used in some areas, but it's sort of the goal of the party column ballot is for you to not take as much time. It is the TikTok or the X or the, no one does Reels, Snapchat. Are those called Reels? I don't know. Someone should send me if I'm wrong or right. Okay. Version of a ballot, because it lists all in one column everyone who's running from a particular political party. So it would be like a Republican column, and it will have this person's running for governor, this person's secretary of state, and so on and so forth all the way down. And then it would give you an option to just vote what is called a straight ticket vote, which means you can mark one box and it would vote for everyone in that column. Now, that is not most common. The most common one is what's called the office group ballot, where there is a office and then the candidates for a particular office are listed underneath that title, all of them together. And then it would give you a label of what political party are. And there'll always be abbreviations. Now, in some places, if it's not touchscreen, they could still use little pens, like sort of more fancy Scantrons, where you're bubbling which one you want. And there's usually like an arrow that points over to the circle you're supposed to bubble in. Okay, and that is called an office group ballot. That's probably the one you're going to come across more often, is the office group ballot. Okay. So we vote on election day, and you don't always know on election day, and odds are you're probably not going to know on election day. Even presidential elections are technically not valid until everything's been counted. What you hear on election night is what are called their forecasting, or based on sampling data, they have enough accuracy to probably predict that this person is going to win that, which is sometimes why the polls close, and it's like with 5% precincts reporting in, we're going to declare this person the winner of a particular state. And you're like, wow, there's 95% of things out there. Well, it depends on what the 5% is and what the polling data is showing. So if you're winning in 5%, 80 to 20, odds are you might win. But that comes a problem sometimes when it comes to battleground states. And the problem when it comes to how people win is we usually have a early rise and then a fall. One political party tends to get an early rise and when precincts close because they do in-person voting, and then that advantage tends to fall through the night as more and more later ballots are counted as opposed to earlier ballots, and as mail-in ballots tend to get counted, because historically Republicans tend to vote early or during the day. Democrats tend to vote after work or before work. And then Democrats tend to, at a higher percentage, vote through mail or through mail-in options. It's just historically what has happened. So you tend to see in some battleground states where the initial push shows a tremendous lead, maybe by a Republican or maybe by one candidate. And then as the night progresses, that narrows. Now, that's how they can predict that too. If it's not really narrowing, then odds are that candidate's going to win that came out in the beginning. But how do people win? Well, in the United States, we only win one way. And that is through, well, that's not true. Some small areas win a different way. But in most ways, we win by what is called plurality, which means you have one more vote than anyone else. That's it. You don't need a majority. You sometimes get a majority. You don't need a majority. You just need more. One more than the other person. Most time elections are decided that way, but that's it. We carve our country up when it comes to like Congress in single member districts, and you vote for people and you vote for people in a particular region, and that the person who wins just has one more vote than anyone else. I know, seems weird, but it's true. That's what we do. Now, in Europe, oh, well, I guess we don't need to do this part here. Let's just, oh, what's happening? We don't need to do this in others because I'm sort of telling you how to do it here, right? Okay, so in Europe, they do what is called a proportional system. What does that mean? A proportional system means what usually happens in Europe is that there are much more political parties than in the United States. Our system is basically a two-party system. And the reason why it's two-party system is that our government organized how elections work into single member districts, which is we carve up when there's more than one office available, except for Senate. When there's more than one office available, meaning for state legislature, state senate, the House of Representatives, we look at the state and then we chop it up into bits. And we say, okay, this region is going to elect one, this region is going to elect another. What that enables is that whoever gets one more vote than anyone else can become in office. Now, let's look at a proportional system and let's look at Arizona. Let's carve up and say, okay, Arizona is going to get 9 people in Congress. So now how we run things is we look at Arizona, we chop it up into 9 districts and say, okay, we're going to elect one person in every district. In Europe, what they would look at is, okay, this area is going to elect 9 people. We're going to say, whoever the top 9 vote getters are, that's who is in office. Well, what that enables is a multiple political parties to exist because you can get representation. A lot of times we don't have multiple political parties in the United States because the way our system works, if you're voting for a third-party candidate that doesn't have a lot of support, you theoretically are throwing that vote away because you're changing the threshold necessary for one of the major parties to elect their person. However, in a proportional system, it encourages those third parties to run candidates because you might squeak in. And once you squeak in with 1 seat, you can build off of that. And you might get 2 seats the next time because they can see, hey, this political party is doing something or this political party is making achievements, and you might gain more support. And so this is a percent determines the number of seats. Okay, and so that's usually done in Europe, which is why if you look at who the prime minister is or how their legislatures are comprised, they have multiple different political parties, some with lots of representation, just like our Democrats and Republicans, and some with a little representation, well, I don't want to bog you down with any more names, okay? So that's how elections work and how things operate. Now, 37 minutes. That's probably quit it for today. Okay, guys. I'm gonna touch and do this next one the next time I talk to you about it, which is how we campaign for office and what are the things that structure that election environment. Okay, so till next time, don't forget to click like and subscribe. And thank you. Shout out to my Patreon members, Carolee Kantak, Vanna Charapa, and James Bryce. See you next time.